He's a world-famous academic in the field of linguistics, but he's probably better known as a political dissident and long-time critic of US foreign policy. Professor Noam Chomsky has spent a lifetime highlighting injustices around the world. Well, last week he was in Ireland, where Prime Time's Robert Short caught up with him.
Great powers do not support human rights except sporadically. They don't support democracy.
Noam Chomsky has been an outspoken voice on human rights and foreign policy for decades. He was in Ireland last week for a series of lectures. He also recorded an interview with Prime Time. I asked him first about the ongoing war in Syria.
Syria is a pretty awful situation. In fact, the two sides are moving towards a kind of a suicidal conflict. The only plausible way out is through some form of negotiations. Neither side is capable of destroying the other. That's pretty clear. And certainly plenty of atrocities on both sides, mostly government, but it's not alone.
There's a big debate in Europe over whether or not the Syrian opposition should be armed and whether or not an EU embargo on arms to Syria should be lifted. What's your view on that?
First of all, the opposition is being armed. Pouring arms into the area is likely to inflame conflicts, atrocities, probably end up helping the... when you arm a group, the arms tend to go to the best fighters, the ones who are on the front. And those happen to be the jihadi elements. There's problems with what's called the Middle East peace process. Is a process organized and run by the United States. And there can't be a serious peace process that way. The U.S. is an advocate, not a neutral observer. If there were to be a genuine peace process, it would be administered by some country that, for one thing, has a degree of international respect.
Do you think that there has been any change at all in the approach of the United States towards Israel and the Palestinian territories under President Obama? Because he was actually criticised for his approach towards Israel at one point over the last couple of years.
Actually, under him it's gotten worse, which was totally predictable. In fact, I wrote about it in 2008 before the primaries, even just using his webpage. It was pretty clear that I can give you the details if you like, but it was pretty clear that he was not going to be willing to support anything that involved Palestinian rights. And apart from some what's called soaring rhetoric, that's the term that's usually described for him, apart from the soaring rhetoric, there's been nothing except making it worse. In the case of Iran, no one knows, including U.S. intelligence, whether they're trying to develop nuclear weapons. Maybe they are. A general assumption is they're probably trying to develop what's called nuclear capability. That means the ability to develop a nuclear weapon if you choose to, and dozens of countries have that. So are there concrete measures you could take to avoid that, short of sanctions and war? Yeah, there are. So one possibility, for example, would be to try to renew an agreement that was reached in May 2010 between Brazil, Turkey, and Iran. They agreed that Iran would stop uranium enrichment. It would send its low-enriched uranium for storage elsewhere, in fact, to Turkey. And in return, the West would provide isotopes, whatever's needed for the medical reactors in Iran. That was the agreement. As soon as that agreement was reached, it was bitterly condemned by the United States. It's Obama. The U.S. media denounced Brazil, particularly for carrying this out. The head of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mohammed al-Baradei, said that the U.S. is refusing to take yes for an answer. The U.S. is supporting warlords who are not all that different from the Taliban. And the question is, what are the effects if they're staying there? What the effects if they're staying there will probably be to prolong the conflict.
Isn't Afghanistan, I suppose, a prime example of the difficulties of intervention?
No, because there were no difficulties. The U.S. invaded Afghanistan. We know why. It was public. No secret documents needed. In early October 2011, 2001, George Bush announced that he demanded that the Taliban hand over Osama bin Laden to the United States for prosecution. The Taliban requested evidence. The U.S. refused to provide any evidence. Well, that was the invasion. Nothing about moral concerns.
But should there be? I mean, is Afghanistan an example of the rest of the world has a responsibility towards a people where there is no state, or at least there was no state there when the Taliban was there?
I mean, what you're saying would be true if governments of the world accepted that they have a responsibility for anything except their own power and the demands of the powerful sectors within them.